And hello, all the webinar participants. My name's Troy Steers. I'm the Principal Advisor for Home Care with Leading Age Services Australia. And today's webinar is focusing on the changes to home care pricing transparency and comparability in My Aged Care. I thank you for taking the time to join me today to look through what's been happening in regards to home care pricing discussions across 2018 into 2019. If you do have questions, I'll just go through a bit of admin. If you do have questions, you will note down on the left-hand corner of your screen, there is a area where you can type your message here. That will enable you to add comments or questions that will appear in private for me to look at and consider. It won't be public for others to see, so I'm expecting I might get a range of responses. What I will be doing is taking note of the questions and, where appropriate, providing feedback to the Department of Health in helping industry transition into the changed home care pricing, transparency and comparability arrangements. So let's get started. So what we've got up there now is just an overview of what today's webinar will cover. We're going to look at some of the issue that has created an intent for greater transparency and comparability for home care package pricing. Some of the key dates where have been considered in the evolution of a schedule which the Minister has written to providers, and I'm aware that approved providers have started to receive their letters from the Minister that outline some of the elements of the schedule in regards to design and components. So we'll have a bit of a discussion around that, and also have a look at some of the considerations providers will need to be thinking about in regards to the next steps and moving forward in what is a legislated responsibility for home care providers to make pricing information more transparent, and also submit it in a form that will create greater comparability through the My Aged Care Service Finder. Okay, so what we know is that there is some complexity for consumers in engaging with My Aged Care and with the aged care system. And one of the areas that's been highlighted through the legislative review of aged care was around the transparency and comparability of prices, noting that home care providers can offer a range of services and options that are not easily comparable and can create some ambiguity for consumers in trying to engage with getting their needs met through home care. So it's acknowledged that the current home care pricing arrangement is not transparent or able to be easily understood and compared by consumers. We've also heard the Minister comment extensively on concerns regarding providers charging high admin fees. We know there's a lot of variability in that. And the aim of this measure for increased transparency and comparability of pricing information is to better support senior Australians to understand and compare home care pricing information and be able to make a more informed decision about which provider is best placed to deliver their care. Okay, and that comes with some caveats in that consumers need to be engaging with the My Aged Care Service Finder to be able to access this additional functionality that will allow them to compare prices. But in the longer term, this reform will support consumers in the context of their being more capable or better able to engage with My Aged Care, knowing that My Aged Care continues to be upgraded and improved in terms of its functionality. So let's have a look at where did the pricing schedule development originate from. So in 2017, September, the legislative review came out, and within that was a recommendation around increasing transparency and comparability for consumers. Then in February 2018, the Minister wrote to the peak bodies, consumer peaks and provider peaks, requesting a roundtable discussion to start the process of looking at how to realise the need for greater transparency and comparability on pricing for home care consumers. In March 2018, Laser went out to our home care advisory groups and did consultations on their perspective around home care pricing, and we received a range of responses that we were then able to feed back into that roundtable process. That led to a position paper being sent to the Minister in April for consideration. Now, I will just say that that original position paper, there were some varied views across provider and consumer groups, and that was noted within that position paper, noting that we have had members have expressed some concern regarding over-regulating the display of pricing that may restrict innovation and business models. The Minister then wrote to industry in July around the intent to commence work for this schedule coming online, and at that time it was looking at around April 2019 was the commencement date. The Department of Health at that time also issued a consultation paper. It was a closed consultation process on an initial draft schedule proposal, and in September Laser undertook a survey consultation with our members, documenting that feedback in a report to the Department of Health. Now, I will say that amongst the Laser membership within that report, there was varied opinion regarding that initial draft schedule. There was an in-principle agreement that greater transparency and comparability was a good thing for the industry and for consumers and would support older Australians in making better choices. But there was some concern regarding that actual schedule. And one of the key things that Laser highlighted at that point of time, which is basically based on a review of literature, is that too much information with too much choice in a very time-pressured situation can translate to poor decision-making amongst people. And this really highlighted the need for a very simple approach to creating transparency and comparability so as not to overload consumers with too much choice that could potentially paralyse them from making a good choice. And we submitted that report. There was then some further discussions amongst a group that the Department of Health engaged during October. And as we started to see reiterations of that initial schedule emerge, Laser engaged more extensively on the schedule around items of contention. Some of that was around package administration fees and acknowledgement that there is a legitimate cost to maintain legislative and quality insurance compliance that fee-for-service providers do not need to contend with, and that should be listed separately. And also the acknowledgement that hourly charges or any unit cost should be somewhat consistent across fee-for-service and home care package price schedules, noting that into the future we're going to see consumers likely to access both arrangements as we see the need for consumers to top up above subsidy and home care package funding as demand and supply start to become constrained by the growth in the ageing population. So within that, Laser made it very clear regarding our position on those reiterations, and I'm glad to say the department has heard that call, and the final reiteration reflects the need for us to account for simplicity, the acknowledgement for a package management charge, and also the need to acknowledge that there are different business models that require different pricing arrangements within the schedule. The other thing to note is that at the same time the Minister had written to providers about the need to publish your prices on your own website with a link in the My Aged Care Service Finder, or alternatively through a PDF schedule that can be uploaded into the My Aged Care Service Finder. and that was due to be completed by the 30th of November 2018. I note that the Minister, in writing to home care providers during the last week, has referenced the rate of compliance with that legislative requirement to publish prices, and he indicates that 60% of approved home care providers have been compliant, and that there is still a large number of providers that have failed to meet that requirement. He's then encouraged groups that haven't actually done that to proceed with doing that as a priority, and has referenced the intention for compliance action to be considered in the future. And I'll come back to that shortly, noting that in the recent budget announcement this month, there was additional monies announced to increase the number of frontline staff to progress compliance auditing processes within home care. And so there will be a greater focus on this moving forward, and getting your pricing arrangements up and published consistent with your legislative responsibilities will be important. Okay, so I note there's a question there, why has there been no consequence for non-compliance? I think there has been an acknowledgement that the first step around progressing compliance has been the establishment of the Quality and Safety Commission, as we're now seeing funding announcements to deal with this issue start to progress now that that commission has been established. Two of those announcements, one has been the release of the self-assessment schedule from the Quality and Safety Commission. It could have been released earlier, but I suspect that it probably was waiting for the new commission and the opportunity for key management approval within the new commission. And now we're seeing a budget announcement that will allow the establishment of more staffing to support the administration of processes to ensure a greater level of compliance. So it appears to be slow to start, but it's now ramping up, and there is a greater focus there, so watch this space. And then we have this, in the last week, the Minister writing to home care providers and announcing the intention to go forward with a pricing schedule in the My Aged Care Service Finder that will see greater comparability around pricing. Now, the pricing schedule is only meant to be an indication of prices. It is not a complete and exhaustive list, which is a good thing. There were discussions at some point in the development process about a long, extensive list to allow for complete transparency. But I think there's been a realisation that, you know, we want to go slow. We want to give consumers something to understand and use to compare, but we don't want to overwhelm them straight away. So what we have got coming up is the Department of Health will be releasing a series of communications on the price and comparability changes, and they are now finalising the schedule format and wording, subject to some final consumer user testing. Okay, and this raises the question around some of the ways they're thinking about the schedule. One of the questions that's popped up is, why are we looking at fortnightly pricing arrangements, where traditionally we have had monthly pricing arrangements? An example would have been the package management or administration fee. It used to be charged as a percentage of a monthly income. Now it's been proposed in the schedule to be a fortnightly amount. If we think about consumer testing, consumers receive their pension on a fortnightly basis. And I suspect that through consumer testing, there is greater preference to have information available and communicated to them in a format that aligns with their pension arrangement. It will create changes for providers because subsidy is allocated on a monthly basis, and this will be a key consideration in terms of the final format of the schedule and the wording and how that will impact on changes to current operations. Okay, what I can also indicate to you is that the next My Aged Care Release 14 is scheduled to occur on the 25th of March, and I understand the Department of Health will be hosting a webinar, as they have done in the past, in the lead up to those changes that will come through Release 14. I suspect one of the changes will be the upgrading of the My Aged Care Service Finder functionality to include the schedule. But again, subject to final user testing, there may be a delay, but the government has committed in writing that that will come online by April 2019, which will then allow you to go in to your provider portal and be able to have a look at that schedule. And I suspect the department will provide written communication on the look and feel of that schedule and the cells and definitions prior to being on My Aged Care. So you can use that as a way to start commencing the preparation work that will be needed to be able to transition over to these new arrangements. Okay. Now, these are the key dates for mandatory use of the pricing schedule. From 1st of July 2019, you will be required to have that schedule up and populated on the My Aged Care Service Finder, and that schedule will then be available to be included in all new home care agreements that are offered to new home care package clients that commence service from the 1st of July 2019 onwards. Okay, so not existing clients that you currently have or will onboard prior to 1 July, but new clients. So the preliminary work between now and 1st of July is just getting your pricing ready and your communications with consumers ready. Then in the period post 1 July 2019, you will then have a 12-month period to 1st of July 2020 to transition existing home care package clients over to the new home care pricing arrangements, with the pricing schedule forming part of home care agreements. And the understanding around this is that you will need to do annual reviews with your clients, and that as part of that annual review process, you will be able to introduce the change pricing schedule to align with your legislative responsibilities and be able to introduce that as part of a new home care agreement or an amended home care agreement. And that amendment could be simply a one-page addendum that you add to your agreement and acknowledge key changes relating to this piece of legislation. It doesn't have to be an extensive, revision of the agreement. It's more an addendum and a change to account for the change of pricing. And then ongoing, there will be a requirement around any price changes that you do to update published prices in your schedule that will appear in the My Aged Care Service Finder, your website, and then follow-on effects to home care consumer agreements. Okay, now there's a question that's popped up. Will providers be consulted again after consumer testing? Do we have any opportunity to submit feedback? I'm uncertain as to there will be any further consultation. It is probably more an opportunity to reiterate areas that we would want the department to address to support the transition and change management process. So we support the transition and change management process. So it's pretty much the final reiteration the government is going to go through. Laser did raise to the government that we would like to see the opportunity for this to be a first reiteration, with the opportunity to consider review and revisions as we see how the market responds. There has been no commitment or no indication as to whether the government will or will not consider such an arrangement. Okay, so I expect, thinking about the maximum exit fees when they were first published, there has been market correction around that. And I expect that with pricing, there will be market reaction initially and market correction, and the question will be around the government's involvement in market correction as required, and the engagement between industry, consumers and government will be a critical factor in considering the way the market forces play out and whether there is a need to support market correction at all. So let's wait and see. Now, for providers, for participants on this webinar, these slides will be made available after the presentation, as well as a recording of the webinar. So just clarifying that. Thank you for bringing that up, Jonathan. Okay. So let's have a look at the schedule design. What we've been told by the Department of Health is that the design of the schedule is to encourage senior Australians to choose other factors in addition to price of the service when choosing an approved provider. So the design will include the ability for you to add free text to highlight your point of difference and also to highlight the value proposition behind price points. So it is not just populating a amount and then a definition that you have no control over adding additional text to. There will be the ability to add additional text. The key factor in this is around clear messaging and simple and concise messaging. And again, you will need to see the final design in pulling together your messaging around this. The key message is to understand too much information with too many choices. In a time-pressured environment, consumers may struggle, so you need to keep your messaging concise. It will provide the opportunity for clear and unambiguous pricing information on the common home care services, and there's just a few, and they're slightly different services that may attract different price points. That will lead to a discussion between a consumer and a provider as to why that is. That will increase consumer understanding around pricing in home care, which is a good thing. And it will help to achieve comparability of price across these common home care package service types. It will limit any impact on the ability of providers to innovate by catering to different business models. So there was an acknowledgement late in the development process that some business models may be restricted by the way the pricing was initially drafted as appearing, and it appears the government has heard that, and the Minister has acknowledged there's been extensive consultation, and he has acknowledged that there are important requirements to be able to nominate minimum and maximum price points for those providers that offer different services. And an example of this is brokerage, where an approved provider might have a range of different brokerage providers and each has a different price. There should be the ability for a brokerage provider to articulate those minimum and maximum price points as well as a common price point within the design. So that's been a win for the sector in ensuring we don't stifle or limit the ability of providers that innovate to articulate their business models. And then we need to ensure equity in the requirements across providers and allow dedicated areas to promote a value statement and point of difference. Okay. The other thing to note is that providers will be required to nominate single prices against each price point to be included in the schedule, and that will only need to be included where you offer that service. So, for example, if you do not offer nursing services, but rather you specialise in domestic and personal care, then you would not populate a price point against nursing, unless, of course, you offered that through brokerage, in which case you would be able to enter that price point. There will be definitions provided for each of those price points to support comparability and price setting. So, for example, in terms of package management fees, there will be a clearer and tighter definition regarding what's included and excluded relative to the advice that we were provided in the now retired home care package operational manual that was around 1 July 2015. Additional text can also be added for some price points, and I'm unclear as to which they will be at this stage, to support communication of the value behind a price point. And the published price in the schedule is considered to be the default price a consumer is to be charged, unless a different price is negotiated at the individual level when contracting services with a consumer. And an example of that is a consumer wants something different and your price in that schedule doesn't accommodate that. Then you would need to go and source that specialist service, and in seeking a quote, that's where the price would be different. Okay, so there is an acknowledgement of that will be negotiated at the contracting stage. Those default prices are really about creating a greater potential for comparability, so a consumer can narrow down the number of providers to engage in regards to common areas that they would choose a provider against. In terms of the schedule design, there will be the opportunity to list price points for each home care package level in the schedule. So level 1, level 2, level 3 and level 4. The government recognises that some providers may have different price points for each package level. You may populate the same price across all levels, but there is the flexibility for you to put different prices if that is consistent with your pricing arrangement. There will also be the opportunity for a provider to complete multiple schedules to account for different pricing arrangements if you're servicing consumers across metropolitan, regional and rural postcodes where your pricing may vary. For example, a consumer who lives 20, 30, 50 minutes outside a regional centre may have a different price for an hour of personal care relative to someone that's in a metropolitan area where travel time is 15 minutes. Again, that opportunity is there for providers if their pricing arrangements would require that. And what that would most likely translate to, and we'll wait to see advice from the department on the precise nature of how this will be implemented, is that you would set up one schedule for perhaps a service outlet and assign postcodes that relate to that pricing arrangement. You would assign another schedule for another outlet that has a different pricing arrangement and assign those postcodes that are relevant to that pricing arrangement. So there is the ability for the pricing arrangement to accommodate different prices depending on the markets you're actually delivering services into and requirements for different pricing within those markets. There's also, as has been indicated, the ability for brokerage services to indicate maximum and minimum price points in addition to a common default price point as an indication of the range of price offered. It is only intended that these maximum and minimum price ranges would be completed by people that offer that genuine choice and not by people that offer a single price that are just loading minimum prices to attract a consumer to engage. And we might ask, well, how do we police that? Well, this again comes down to the government funding additional frontline staff to assist with compliance, quality review and auditing, where these things are going to start to get picked up at a greater rate than what they have before to tighten up the integrity of the home care system. The other point to note in the design is a copy of the schedule must be included within a client's home care agreement and individualise the budget with documented account for any negotiated variations to that schedule that may occur at the contracting stage. So that might be a record with a sign-off by the consumer and the provider regarding variations in price relative to what the schedule may indicate the default prices are. Okay, let's get on to the components, which is the really important part that I'm sure a lot of you are very interested in. Package management fee. So this is an alternate arrangement that will be accessible for providers to list fees in lieu of the existing administration fee. We will see a tighter definition of this package management fee that is really aiming to see a fee that will account for costs incurred by an approved provider that relate to your legislative and quality assurance responsibilities and the administration in meeting those responsibilities. It will also be listed as a fortnightly dollar amount that's able to be listed for each package level. And I've commented on that change and why the government's likely to be moving to a fortnightly price, noting that our current pricing is often set up as a monthly fee. And there are other legitimate operational administration costs where the expectation has been indicated by government that these will be loaded into the hourly service prices. And if they are listed separately, such as a handling fee in a brokerage arrangement, there needs to be an open disclosure as to where a fee applies and doesn't apply. But the kinds of things that the government have indicated that package management fee will include is costs for preparing monthly statements, managing the package funds, and compliance and quality assurance activities required for the home care package. They've also indicated it will not include administration costs associated with running any business, such as marketing, office rent, insurances, or activities completed before a person enters a home care agreement or associated with onboarding of clients, as would be administrative costs you would incur in a fee-for-service arrangement. So the intention is those additional administrative costs that you consider would be charged within a fee-for-service arrangement that would be included in hourly unit costs, that arrangement will now apply within home care packages. And it's only those additional costs for package management unique to a home care package that you would be able to load into this package management fee. Okay, so this is a significant change for the sector and will require some considered discussion and account for process and change of process within your management team. Issues you need to account for in that discussion: clients that are accumulating unspent funds will most likely translate to a reduced revenue relative to your current pricing. If they're not spending on those hourly prices, that operational costs relating to running a business, you're not going to get an income for that. The Minister has stated the intention to keep costs to a minimum. Now, we know at the moment there are some providers out there that charge a 13% admin fee, and they're very open about it. And there are some providers that charge, high admin fees around 40 to 50%. This will create a greater transparency regarding bringing those costs in. The thing we do know is that a low admin fee will not necessarily translate to quality services. And this is where we're going to start to see consumers learning as they go. And it will be around also a responsibility around compliance, legislative compliance around your approved provider status and better monitoring of that. That's going to create a tighter accountability and will actually bring those package management fees to a true cost arrangement where people will be held accountable if they cut corners in terms of their legislative responsibilities to reduce their package management costs. So there is a dynamic that will have to play out in the market, and it will be very much dependent on the interrelationship between consumers, providers and regulators. Each has an important role, and if one drops the ball, it will have an adverse consequence on the market moving forward, the way we would hope it would move forward, which is to provide consumers with high quality and safe outcome-directed consumer care. The important point to note is what we observed with maximum exit fees. That's the market force. We're going to see a range of prices when initial publishing happens, and we would expect to see the tightening of those prices ongoing. Labor has raised a concern around a race to the bottom. Cheap prices do not necessarily translate to good service provision. There is a cost for quality, and this is something that government and providers have a responsibility if we're going to build consumer confidence regarding aged care, noting the Royal Commission has a spotlight on quality and safety. I've mentioned consistent pricing across home care packages and fee-for-service. And the other thing we have that has been raised, and we've briefly mentioned, is there will be an impact on you issuing of monthly home care package budget statements. You may potentially now have 2 line items for a fortnightly charged package management fee, or you may make a business decision to change your issuing client states from monthly to fortnightly. It really depends on efficiencies and cost realisation around that. This will be something you will need to internally make decisions with your organisation as how you will manage that. Care management fees is another structure that has been given due consideration. So the government will outline an approach for care management and definitions, but broadly speaking, providers will be able to include in their cost for a case management the review of home care agreements and care plans, the coordination and scheduling of services, ensuring that care is aligned with other supports, so the coordination with other services, providing a point of contact for the home care recipient or their support network in response to inquiries and follow-up of action, ensuring care is culturally appropriate and where you need to contract in language-specific care workers, and identifying and addressing risks to the home care recipient's safety, where a risk is identified by either the consumer, their representative, or care staff entering into a client's home. The important point to note here is that there will be 2 care management line entries in the schedule, one for client self-management and one for care management. And it's acknowledged that each of these will have a slightly different price point. The important thing to note, though, is that, again, for client self-management to work well and to actually be done well, and we've had providers in our constituency that have said, you know, there are providers that self-management does work well with, but there is also the vulnerability for poor oversight of self-management responsibilities by some approved providers who are working on the principle of reducing costs. And the aim is that we need to see greater regulatory oversight of that to rein that behaviour in so it does not have a damaging impact on industry altogether. So again, CODIS piloting, self-management, there's a range of practices that I'm hearing about out there, and this will be something that we would hope we will see greater focus on in building integrity around the validity of self-management moving forward and supporting consumers and providers who genuinely want to offer greater client responsibility for care management arrangements. What I have been advised is that care management across both those line items will be need to listed as a fortnightly dollar amount for each package level with an indicated number of case management hours. Now, the thing I am aware about is that there is variability among consumers around their use of case management. For example, you could have a client on a level 2 package that you may not hear from at all, and all you're focused on doing is checking on the rosters and the scheduling and making sure care visits are being implemented and there are no issues identified by care workers providing that care. But you would have another client on a level 2 package that's ringing you and has a high level of anxiety that requires very close support and a lot of emotional support to be able to help them in the delivery of care and accounting for responding to their concerns. Each has a different requirement in terms of indicated number of case management hours, and there will be need to be consideration regarding how you account for that variability. One option will be to indicate a baseline fortnightly price with the indicated hours, and where consumers actually use hours above that, there may be an additional cost. But that again will be something you will need to account for in the way you communicate in the schedule and provide additional information to help consumers make informed choice in regards to care management charging. Importantly, the Minister has indicated we don't want to see overlapping in charges. So package management, case management or care management and service units costs, there should not be duplication of costs across those prices, and also not charging consumers for over-servicing where they're not using those services, and care management is one of those areas where that has potential vulnerability to occur. Again, noting the need for consistent pricing across home care packages and fee-for-service, and again, a very important area in this is duty of care versus dignity of risk. We know consumers may underestimate personal risk, may indicate, I don't need self-management, I don't need, care management, I'm happy to do it myself. I'd rather spend that particular dollar on additional hours of care. We then have a responsibility to walk alongside the consumers and educate them around the value of case management. And for some consumers, it may translate to trying to allow for incidents to occur where you can use that as an education opportunity to enlighten consumers around the value of care management to prevent reoccurrences of risk situations. In documentation in that is very critical to be able to show the balance between duty of care and dignity of risk. It's a different conversation altogether. Okay, and I've made reference to varied consumer need in your pricing and the education of consumers. Okay, moving along, noticing the time. 5 common service types have been identified: personal care, nursing, domestic care, light personal care, nursing, domestic care, light gardening, and in-home respite. I think what we will see is there will be variability across this pricing, which will lead consumers to ask the question, why are there different price points for each of these service types, which is exactly the question we want consumers to ask, because then you can articulate the value and the quality assurance that goes into that price point. A price point for personal care at a level 3, level 4 is different to domestic care at a level 3, level 4. And that's an important consideration where consumers might have an expectation that, you know, at my level 2, the price was the same. So there will need to be considerations in that regard. It will be listed as an hourly dollar amount with a default price, which is what you are required to charge a client unless a variation is negotiated at contracting. And there is the ability for minimum and maximum prices where a range is offered, for example, in brokerage arrangements. The government's also indicated that you'll be able to list travel charge as a per kilometre charge, and also the ability to list handling fees. The issues to account for will be the education of consumers on the value of service quality underlying price points. And this starts to bring us into the issue of price and quality are correlated. Interestingly, we're seeing the focus on consumer outcomes and demonstration of outcomes start to ramp up in the context of the new aged care quality standards. and both outcome and demonstrating outcomes as well as price transparency will be correlated, and your ability to present this information is going to be critical to educate consumers around value. Okay. The other thing I want to note, which isn't in the information you've received, but I went and sought additional information, is around subsidies and client contributions, and I suspect this will be a point of contention amongst participants. Subsidy allocations will be pre-populated in the schedule for each level as a fortnightly amount and as an annual dollar representation by package level. So the government will pre-populate that. There will also be information in the schedule populating client contribution information. So it will list the maximum basic daily fee a provider can charge a consumer as a fortnightly and annual dollar representation by package level. Now this is the next point to note. It is indicated that there will also be the ability for providers to include lower fee dollar amounts if they are charged and are less than the maximum. Noting current consumer behaviour, current market behaviours, we see consumers negotiating with providers in client onboarding on their ability to waive a client contribution. If this is the current dynamic that's driving consumer choice, the publishing of fees lower than the maximum basic daily care fee is likely to translate to a race to the bottom on client contributions, which is of considerable concern. It's going backward to the idea of encouraging client contribution. Now I'm going to hold that point there and come back to it, but I know this is a point that the industry will have considerable concern around, because client contribution is critical to be able to provide clients the care they need, acknowledging that a large number of consumers are on interim level home care packages and they don't have enough funds to get the care they need, while there's another group that are accumulating unspent funds. So some of you are probably looking a bit like this, others a bit like this, and some are okay. What I would draw your attention to is around the issue of quality and price. There are both reform measures targeting both these areas, and when we look at other industries, the literature shows deeper analysis of customer pricing across a range of industries outside aged care has found that customers of lower cost products are more sensitive to price change. So that group is choosing a product based on price, not on quality. For this group, charging for extra interactions increased the likelihood they would switch to another offer. They are sensitive. In contrast, there's another group of customers who access premium products and are largely immune to price increases. This is the consumer that chooses based on quality. So there are two different target markets that you are servicing. Now you might ask yourself, which is my primary market? That's the key point. We should have enough data since February 2017 for you to be able to define your customers. And I suspect there will be two markets emerging as we move to greater price transparency. They will come from three groups: those who can afford to pay and are willing, which is a minority group at the moment. There needs to be greater incentivization for consumers to contribute to the cost of care, and this has been a large focus of Labor's pre-budget submission. There's also those who can afford to pay and are not willing, a large part of the market. We even see consumers asking providers to waive income-tested fees. And then those consumers who cannot afford to pay for all. And these are the groups on interim packages who are most at risk on entering into residential care while they wait for a higher level package. So they're the three groups that exist in your current market, and you will need to develop pricing arrangements that respond to each of their behaviours. The important thing to know is over time they become more conscious of quality. Their initial purchasing price, if they do not understand what quality is in aged care, will be based on price. So we need to allow for that. So there is a ratio, quality and price. They are correlated. So in terms of your immediate requirements, there is time and effort required to undertake price repositioning and adjustment consistent with the schedule requirements. And we need to wait in the next month for the government's communication around that. They're in the final stage of use of testing. It is coming out. And Laser will commit to providing that advice to you as soon as it is available. There is the potential for initial reactive market response in a highly competitive environment. We know there are not enough packages relative to demand, and there are a large number of providers, and some of the behaviours of providers are questionable in terms of honouring legislative and quality assurance responsibilities. There is a requirement for government to assist in that respect, and the question then will be, will recorrection follow? And the other thing to note, and this is the key point, in February earlier this month, the government announced a number of budget initiatives, one being $7.7 million to increase workforce across complaints, compliance, approved provider assessment, and auditing of home care services, with the aim to increase, enhance the safety, quality, integrity of home care. When I look at the detail behind that funding, 17.8 additional frontline staff will be allocated for those functions in 2018-19 and an additional 22 staff in 2019-2020. And the aim is to support the rapid growth in home care. And this is what has been missing. It wasn't in the May budget, and it was indicated by Laser to government. This needs to be something to address. We've highlighted it across the 2018 year period, and we now see the budget announcement in the lead up to federal election. So the next steps. Well, you've got your fact sheet now, improving home care pricing information. I have not yet seen it available on the web. So what you have is what you've got, and we also will be issuing in e-news. We've issued in e-news information and that fact sheet as well. Await the Department of Health communication on the schedule's finalisation and definitions. Be ready for the Department of Health webinar on My Aged Care Release 14. Happy to receive your comments, and I'm seeing questions and comments popping up now that I will take into account with the intention to provide feedback to the Department of Health on issues to account for in the transition, and commence work on pricing adjustments and system reconfiguration relating to price to commence 1 July, but also concurrently really working to account for demonstrating consumer outcomes for quality. This is not just meeting minimum requirements against the new aged care standards, it's demonstrating consumer outcomes in a commercial market where consumers will look at outcomes and price in making a decision. We see it in all other industries. If I buy a TV, the quality of that product determines the price I'm prepared to pay. We just need to wait for consumers to catch up on understanding what is quality in aged care. And we have a responsibility as industry through the new aged care standards to take the lead on that. And the other part is account for market adjustment in your revision cycles for prices. So we will see the first 12 months initial pricing, and I anticipate as the market responds and as you do your competitor analysis, you will probably need to make some revisions to your cycles. Your first price is not your last price. This is about positioning in the market. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time for questions, and what I will say in the lead up to questions is that the questions I don't answer now, I will be looking to issue further communication in response to questions through a communication outside of the webinar. And if I don't have that answer, I will put those questions back to government, and I expect they will be looking to answer questions as they proceed with their communications ongoing. The other thing I will say is this webinar recording as well as the slides will be sent to all registered participants via email after the presentation, so you will be able to have access to that. Okay, let's see if we can go and have a look at some questions. Okay, so there's been a question around Commonwealth Home Support. The ability to use funds in CHSP to lower their business administration costs and price points. Great point. CHSP, we need a decision from government on CHSP. Okay, we know the government is committed to the integration of CHSP and home care packages, consistent with their response to the recommendations of the legislative review. The timing of that is a question, and what we will see potentially is if the government does not respond quick enough, we're going to see that disadvantage people who do not operate in CHSP. The kinds of things that could potentially improve the situation is greater consumer direction in CHSP. These are things the government's going to need to consider, and it will be advice we will be feeding back. We are asking for government on closer engagement regarding decisions for integration between CHSP and home care packages, and the National Aged Care Alliance have been doing the same on behalf of the broader aged care sector. In terms of support for changing a process, the document will release their information, but what LASER can do to support you is we have specialist home care consultants that can work with you in your business design to be able to account for pricing adjustments. So I want to encourage you, if you do want to have an engagement or even just an initial query around how we can help you, do send an email to us. I'll put up an email address there, homecare@laser.asn.au, and happy to have those conversations and support, as well as what I anticipate will be further discussion through our home care advisory groups on what will be a very topical issue in the upcoming months. The other things I'll cover off, definitions regarding service types. I've got a question around light gardening. We need to wait until the government release those type definitions, and then we can proceed from there. In regards to travel charges, can we do that as a flat rate rather than kilometre? The key requirement is your articulation of how you price. All right. If you price as that, we need to look at your ability to be able to do that and articulate if that suits you. The schedule does not limit you pricing other ways, and there will be a link in the schedule for you to direct clients to a broader pricing arrangement within your own website. So it doesn't exclude you from listing pricing arrangements you want to retain beyond the schedule, noting the schedule is aimed at just creating an initial touch point for comparison. Okay? And a couple of last questions. Okay, the key thing, question here around what do we do if consumers are not paying their client contributions? Are they expecting providers to make up the difference? My response to you, and has been to other providers, is that you need to assess the risk for the client in providing care that is provided with the available funds relative to assessed need. So that's your duty of care, is to assess risk and communicate back to the consumer the risks they face and your recommendations for how care should be provided. In many cases, your recommendation will be the client needs to contribute to meet those needs. In some cases, the risk may be so significant that you indicate we cannot provide you that service and you will need to see another provider who's willing to do that. We think the risk is so great. Where you see the risk is manageable, or you see a consumer is willing to contribute with the preference to initially determine whether the risk is manageable, you will then need to make a decision regarding dignity of risk and your ability to walk with the consumer to monitor how that risk plays out and engage in review discussions if there is a need to change the way care is delivered to respond to risk situations. So if people do choose to provide care at a level lower than what subsidy and client contribution would allow, you do have responsibility to provide care and services up to the full amount. If you choose to provide lesser, you need to be a good account for how you're going to manage that risk. And that's a duty of care issue, and it's another conversation, a bigger conversation altogether. Okay, I'm going to finish there. That's the last. I'll note there's some extra questions. I will respond to those questions out of session in our e-news where I can, and will provide advice further on. I hope this has been of help to you at an initial stage. Laser is committed to provide timely advice to our members to help you move forward in doing what you do well, which is supporting old Australians to live safely and providing quality care in their home. Thank you.